Manufactured by Incom Corporation, the T-65B X-Wing Starfighter was the backbone of the Rebel Alliance's Starfighter Corps. Though slower and less maneuverable in space than its primary adversary, the Imperial TIE Fighter, the X-Wing made up for it with heavy shielding and a compact target profile. Armed with 4 wing-mounted laser cannons, 2 forward-facing torpedo launchers, and a shield generator, the X-Wing was a formidable multi-purpose fighter. Its advanced sensor suite could track up to 1,000 objects and simultaneously target up to 20 enemies. To complement its sublight engines, the X-Wing featured a long-range hyperdrive, enabling it to perform not just fighter attack roles, but also long-range reconnaissance missions. A trusty astromech droid acted as navigator, handling hyperdrive calculations and, when needed, even piloting the craft autonomously. Welcome to Jason's Space Dock, your home for sci-fi modeling masterpieces. As usual, I'm going to read from my iPad, because I can't remember scripts. Today we're diving into the MPC 163 X-Wing Starfighter, part of a user-generated content commission build I did for the Autoworld Store. If you've seen your ads, you might recognize some of the work once this video goes up, though not the voiceover. Apparently mine didn't make the cut, and they replaced me with AI. No hard feelings. This build is straight out of the box, completely unlit and unmodified, which is a bit of a departure from my usual projects, but I'll touch on that later in the video. For an older kit with MPC's well-known quirks, I was pleasantly surprised by minimal flash and better than expected fit. That said, there's a few tricky spots with notable misalignments, but we'll get into that during the build. Now, before we jump into the assembly, let's take a quick look at the iconic studio model that brought the X-Wing to life. Few franchises have contributed more to pop culture than Star Wars. While the TIE Fighter may edge out the X-Wing as the ultimate icon, it's a close race. Originally envisioned by George Lucas and brought to life by design legends Ralph McQuarrie, Colin Candwell, and Joe Johnson, the X-Wing's design became an instant classic. The studio models used by ILM were built up around a hollow core with a strong armature. This allowed for multiple mounting points, enabling dynamic filming angles. Inside, these models were packed with electronics and cooling systems for lighting effects and motorized wings. ILM constructed several hero models for close-ups and detailed shots, as well as numerous pyro models for those explosive space battles. As usual, let's take a look at the box itself, because you have reference photos on the outside panels, and on the back and inside panels you have the painting and decal guide. And what's inside the box is the clear base, which is okay. The S-foil sprue, the other S-foil sprue, which has the engines and all the bits and pieces go with that. The fuselage half and the upper half. The instructions, which are pretty detailed, and the 9-step instructions. I was having a lot of trouble seeing the numbers on the sprue, so I had to add a little bit of pencil line and then snip out all of the engine parts and do the assembly. Now, this is a snap assembly. The first few I tried to do the snap, the fit's not great, so I started cutting the pins off and just gluing them together like this. Once I did that, the assembly was much easier because I wasn't fighting the parts anymore, and I was able to knock these out pretty quickly. And I just want to show this because this is an area of noticeable flash on each and every engine. The S-foils are the most complex part of the model, simply due to parts count, and not just because of the hinge, because you've got the engines, engine cowls, underside engine assemblies, gun mounts, and landing gear if you decide to put it on. So I ended up fighting with the snap-in piece on the gun mounts like I did with the engines, and I opted to then pop it back off and make a modification. Previously I cut the peg, this time I'm opening up the receiver, and then popped it back on and got a much better result, much better fit, but I still opted to use glue to get that as tight as possible. The intakes need a bunch of attention, not because of flash, but I would describe them as spurs, just things to keep them from mating properly. Once that's solved, you can also drop in the underside engine cowls. There's 4 of them. I've only shown putting one in here. It's just a snap fit. And there is the completed wing assembly, except for the engines, which go on pretty well. It's actually just snap fit, and this is one of the cases where it wasn't really a problem. And that's the completed wing assembly, and then you're going to want to duplicate that on the next one. Once the S-foils are assembled, you can put the two halves together on the center hub that acts as an axle, so you can open and close them into flight or attack position. There are two panels required to install the S-foils into the fuselage, and that's the rear equipment bay and this forward bulkhead I'm popping on right now, and then the rear equipment bay. You're going to want to pay special attention to what is up and down, and the instructions weren't super clear. But, as you're going to see, you can drop it right into the fuselage and snap it together. I applied glue as well. But then we ran into a problem. Take a look at this. Oh, everything looks good, looks great. And, oh, whoops, that's the landing gear. It's upside down. Let's fix that. Oh, I don't have that footage. Moving on. Once I corrected the installation error, I went ahead and applied the base coat. And I really wanted to show off here how much the base coat alone brings out the surface relief detail on this model. And this is going to be super fun to weather because of that. I actually don't have much to say here, except that I enjoy decaling. It's always been one of my favorite parts, even when I wasn't good at it. This is actually a fairly extensive sheet for such a small model, especially considering what was available in the past. So let's just go ahead and put some on. Initially, I tried to do a pin wash, and I'm using the Vallejo Wash FX, the acrylic version, but it wasn't flowing the way I hoped, and I'm not sure if it's the thinness of the product or the brush I was using, so I opted to go ahead and just paint it on. Once I got the appropriate coverage, and before it dried completely, I went ahead and just wiped it away and streaked it with a Kleenex. For areas where it was too heavy, I just used Vallejo airbrush thinner and a Q-tip, and in some places a Kleenex to wipe away the excess. And when you're done, you should get a nice grimy spacecraft with some streaking, light or heavy, depending on your application. I did the painting in two phases because there were areas I wanted to be untouched by weathering, and it would be easier to do once all the other areas were done. In this case, the engine nozzles were super easy to do by brush afterwards, and I do like brush painting. It's a bit relaxing. And the cockpit canopy, as you'll see here, I did all freehand, no masks, and that's not to show off, just it went exceedingly well. And same with the rear canopy, I just did a straight brushing on it, and it turned out very nicely. And the last element is the pilot, his orange jumpsuit, and I gotta say I love this molding because this dude definitely skipped leg day. I mean, he looks like a gorilla. I used clear paint for the mask and black for the gloves, and that wrapped that guy up. That puts us one step closer to completing the X-Wing, but there's a few more steps left to go, and I'm just gonna pop on the canopy before we move on to additional markings. I opted to use the decals for the rear canopy windows rather than painting them. Not that I didn't think I could do it, I just wanted to be nice and clean. And for the R2-D2, I actually separated the decals because trying to bend this over R2's dome head was kind of a no-go. So by separating the upper piece versus his eyepiece, gives an opportunity to get these on as flat as possible and use the least amount of microsol to get it to set. And now we're on to the last step for weathering. I used the Tamiya pastels and a little makeup sponge because this is more focused weathering. I'm using this specifically for streaking areas and highlighting sooty, dirty areas. So in the case of this, Being an atmospheric craft, I've put a lot of weathering onto the nose and additional raised areas, so the canopy where the proton torpedo launcher is, and that's more toward the back, leading edges of the wings, and just additional streaking to kind of give it a little bit of depth and visual interest. And there you have the completed X-Wing. Now I did put a clear coat, a dull clear coat on top of this just to seal everything up. But you have overall dirty grime. I didn't do any rust. Some weathering streaking just to give it a little bit of life and, show that it's in and out of atmosphere. Given what I know of MPC kits, I expected this to be an absolute garbage model, with all the trimmings, poor fit, and a ton of flash. So I was pretty surprised when I opened up the box to find very little flash and only a couple of spots with poor fit. There was a slight step on one side of the fuselage below the cockpit. My biggest complaint with the kit is the S-foil assembly. It fits just fine into the fuselage, but there's no way to center it, meaning every time you open or close the wings, you have to manually reset to level. It was a good attempt by MPC to step up a plain model, but less than ideal final result. I also made an error, and at first I installed the X-Wing assembly upside down, but I'm only going to take half blame for that mistake, as the instructions weren't super clear about which way was up on the rear panel, which I was using as a guide. However, I should have noticed the holes for the landing gear were facing up, so that's on me. But that leads me to the most important piece of advice I want to share with both seasoned and novice model builders. Don't stress about making mistakes. Fear of messing up shouldn't hold you back from building. Anything can be fixed with little patience and creativity. As I mentioned in the introduction, I did not like this model. I did 2 builds back to back for Autoworld, and I had to focus exclusively on the build. Once the X-Wing is assembled, the rest is easy. There's very little in the way of paint, and the supplied decals are pretty forgiving. The weathering, which isn't required by any means, was a personal choice to give it a worn look and put it more in alignment with what was seen on screen. And it was a chance to show just how easy it is to do basic weathering and get a decent result. The MPC Little X-Wing is far from perfect, but I would recommend this kit to beginners because it is generally easy to build. Thank you for joining me here at Jason's Space Dock. I hope you enjoyed my build of the 163 X-Wing. I'll admit I went into this with pretty low expectations, but it turned out to be a surprisingly straightforward build. The biggest challenge was getting the X of the S foils just right, thanks to some less than ideal engineering. That said, with a solid dose of weathering, it shaped up into a pretty decent model kit. Model building is all about the journey. Every product has its unique challenges, but each one is a chance to sharpen your skills and create something truly one of a kind. If you enjoyed this build, please share it with your fellow modelers. It is the single best way to help this channel grow. So keep creating, enjoy the process, and I will see you in the next video where I tackle the 132 Galileo shuttlecraft.